This video is going to discuss free will and determinism. So the best way to define free will is the ability to choose otherwise. Free will requires choices. If you are trying to do something and there's only one option available, you don't have free will in regards to that decision because there are no other options available. There is no ability to choose otherwise. So if you read the supplementary material by Van Inwagen, he explains free will as a garden of forking paths. Basically, anytime you come to a decision point, you should be able to go in any direction that you want, so long as it doesn't violate the laws of nature. We can't just decide to fly away, right? But you can decide if you want a hamburger or a sandwich for lunch. So free will is the ability to choose otherwise. Determinism is the idea that everything that happens has a cause or universal causation. So there are no uncaused events, results, or effects. Everything has a cause. So in determinism, it's important to note that you can still make choices, but your choices are going to be determined by factors that are outside of your control. So what you get with determinism is the illusion of free will. It feels to you like you're making important choices, but the choices you're making have been determined by factors out of your control. So let's say that you're a hard worker. You've got a really good work ethic. We could explain your work ethic by talking about your genetics and your upbringing, and both of those things are out of your control. You don't get to choose how your parents raise you or the genetic material they use to create you. So you don't get to choose not to work hard either. If you're a hard worker, you're a hard worker. And sometimes that's to your own detriment. Sometimes you wish you could just give up on a project because, say, no one else cares about it. But you don't choose in a meaningful sense. It's just a feature of who you are, and you didn't select it. It's just who you are. So your choices here are going to spring from your mind, and you didn't create the void from which they came. Think about it like this. The result of everything that leads up to that moment of choice is all based on things that you didn't have control over. So the kinds of choices you make are going to relate to the kind of person that you are, and the kind of person that you are is not something that was freely chosen. All of your inclinations and your talents and your abilities are all out of your control in the sense that you can't freely choose them. So you're kind of just left with the idea that you'll make choices, you'll believe yourself to be free, but it's all just an illusion. Your choices, your efforts, and your intentions are not under your control in the sense that you didn't bring them into the world. So in a deterministic system, you can do what you want, but you haven't chosen your wants. So if you think about food is a good illustration. You think about your favorite food. You didn't freely choose before you had ever encountered this food to like this kind of food. You sat down one day, you tried it, you liked it, and now it's your favorite because you like the way that it tastes. There isn't anything that you can do to make yourself stop liking it. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to try it now and I'm going to hate it. That's just not how it works. It's not under your control to do that. So there's a quote by a philosopher named Sam Harris that says, you can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do. So it's an interesting problem. Another worry in a deterministic system, a worry is, how do we hold people morally responsible if they cannot help what they do? So how can I hold you accountable for what you've done in a moral sense, not a legal sense, if it's not under your control to do something different? So that is not an objection to determinism. It's a feature of determinism. If determinism is correct, how can we have moral judgments? Is it even possible? So let's talk about different variations of determinism quickly. Religious determinism is the idea of predestination. It's where It's actually a side effect of the Abrahamic God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. If God is supposed to be an omnipotent and omniscient being, meaning he knows everything and he can do anything, it means that you can't have free will. It isn't possible. Because how can you act freely if God created you and he knows what you'll do? So if he's all knowing, that means he knows everything. He knows everything that you will ever do. And if he's all powerful, if he is the creator of everything, and he created you, that means he made you knowing exactly what you would become. So how is it possible for you to have free will? Because free will requires the ability to choose otherwise. And if God doesn't know what you're going to do, then he isn't all knowing. And if he does know what you're going to do, then you don't have free will because you can't do anything other than what he knows. So Calvinism is a branch or a religion that accepts the predestination understanding of the world. So there's some problems that we see with religious determinism. The first is there's no proof again of the existence of this particular deity. So the proof question is always going to come up when we introduce religion, because if we don't have definitive proof, it's only going to apply to whatever individuals happen to buy into that particular sect. So if you accept this on faith and you just say, yes, I accept that predestination rules the day, you end up with the problem of evil. So if God is predetermining all of your actions, how can he reward and punish people for things they can't control? Meaning, how can he send you to heaven or hell for being a good or bad person if it wasn't up to you to be a good or bad person? Because remember, predestination means I made you to be exactly what you are. So if I made you, or if you're a killer or a thief, I made you to be that thing. So how can I punish you for doing exactly what I made you to do? That just seems wrong on a couple of different counts. So these problems don't disprove the view. They just show you why a lot of people have a hard time accepting it. But the big worry here is if God's omnipotent and omniscient, you can't be free. Scientific determinism is the idea that there is universal causation. So scientific inquiry demands acceptance of universal causation. The book goes into a couple different approaches. The Newton approach, where everything is governed by natural laws, therefore there can be no freedom. Freedom becomes an illusion here. Everything is physical, and everything exists in cause-effect relationships with other things, and they all adhere to natural laws. They introduce in the book the Heisenberg's quantum theory of physics, where maybe freedom is possible even for potentially non-conscious things. They talk about Darwin and his survival of the fittest. So natural selection has nothing to do with freedom itself. Nature here is governing the makeup, the strength, and the survival of particular things, but not in any kind of guided sense. So it just means each time we copy genetic material, each time a being creates an offspring, genetic material is copied, but it's never copied exactly. There's always slight mutations, and these mutations create differences in offspring. So these differences are going to allow it to either thrive in its environment or to fail in its environment. If it fails, then that adaptation is going to die off and it's not going to get passed on to the next generation. If it thrives, that adaptation will get passed on to the next generation, and then we'll see another variation. So evolutionary changes are slow and local, and they take millions and millions of years. So it's not something that we can just go say, hey, there's evolution happening out in the world today. It's a very complex process, but it does. It's not going to give us any kind of freedom. So a more modern take on scientific determinism. Think about it like this. Your own genetic makeup wasn't chosen by you. We talked about this earlier. You are just the product of your parents' genetic material. So if your genetic material is determining everything about you, how could you possibly be free? So a lot of us wanted to do other things, right? But the older you get, the more limitations you see on what you can actually be. So Imagine, being an athlete your whole life, and then you play in high school, and then you realize, well, you're not good enough to play in college. Well, your whole life was built on the idea that you were going to go be some professional athlete. Now you have to realize that that's not going to happen. And the sad thing is, it's not because you didn't work hard enough. Hard work doesn't guarantee success ever. Just because one works hard doesn't mean that one will be successful. And people can be successful that don't work very hard. Um, Imagine LeBron James. Yeah, he's a very good basketball player, perhaps one of the best ever. I would bet that if he never practiced at all, if he was just a lazy kind of player, which isn't the case, but if it were the case, he would still be in the top 50% of players in the NBA. He wouldn't be the best, but he would still be in the top 50%. And he would be because just his genetics, he's just built to be great at athletics. He's got superior genetic makeups to most of the rest of the human population. So there isn't anything that he did to choose this. Now, he has worked very hard to hone his craft, and he's become perhaps the best basketball player ever. And that is commendable. That's, great stuff. But also we could say his work ethic is perhaps a product of his genetics too, so not chosen by him either. And the same would be true for all of us. So the things that we're good at, the things that we like, the things that we are not good at, they're all out of our control in the sense that we can't access them. We can't change them on whims or of our own will. So how are we free? Another variation of determinism is economic or social, and this is the sort of Marxism, the dialectic materialism. Basically, what that means is we can't avoid what he wants to say is we can't avoid that we are determined by evolutionary, economic, and social class struggle. So we've moved as a species from early agrarian economies to monarchies through feudalism and industrialism and capitalism, and he thinks eventually through socialism and finally toward a classless society. This is inevitable. There's nothing you can do to change it. It's just the course of humanity, and that's the way it's going to run through these economic structures. Psychological determinism, the book talks about two different examples with Freud and B.F. Skinner. So Freud says all human beings are determined by their inner drives and their unconscious motivations. So again, things that you can't control, things that you're not responsible for and you can't really help. But Freud says they're going to drive, how you live your life. Skinner says all humans are conditioned by their environments, and again, you didn't choose your environment. So it's kind of out of your control. You're going to become who you are either because of or in spite of your environment. So if you're raised, let's say, a very conservative political person because you were born in Alabama, we could say that you're the product of your environment. And if you were born and you became, let's say, a very far left kind of liberal political person because you grew up in Alabama, you didn't like everything that you saw around you, we would say that you also became this way because of your environment. So your environment, in Skinner's view, is going to determine you no matter how you turn out. It's either because everyone else is like that, or you're like you are because you want to spite everyone else around you. So fatalism is a different idea. Don't conflate fatalism with determinism. They're not the same things. So fatalism is the idea that all events are irrevocably fixed. They're all predetermined and humans cannot alter them in any way. The future is always beyond your control. So determinism and fatalism are not the same things. The fatalist would say whatever will be, will be. Imagine it is kind of just sitting back and just letting things happen. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and it has to happen because it's been predetermined. Determinism doesn't work that way. If you just sit down and wait on stuff to happen, nothing's going to happen. You still have to go interact with the world, but you need to understand that you're not going to get to influence outcomes in the way that you want to influence them. So for fatalism, if you've ever seen the movie Final Destination, think about it like that. You're not going to escape the end game. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and you can't get away from it. You can't get around it. So hard determinism is the idea that if all events are caused, it's impossible for you to have freedom of the will. So if we trace back the causes in your life far enough, we'll see that the basic causes aren't actually in or within human control. We could say that there are the fundamental features of our existence are out of your control, but these things have determined how everything else is going to play out. So it's possible for you to affect some things, but the way that you affect them is going to be caused by your own personal makeup and your environment, which again, you had no control over. So we are, as a group, very poor causal calculators in the sense that we don't immediately see all of the causes that go into any specific effect. Um, the existence of unknown causes would be more of a reason not to hold people morally responsible for their actions, not less of a reason. So even if we can't see all of the causes that would justify taking up a hard determinist approach, we need to understand that it's impossible for us to see all those things. We just can't, we're not that good at recognizing cause and effect relationships in the world. So the soft determinist is going to, as you could guess, not go as hard as the hard determinist. There is universal causation for the soft determinist, but some of this causation, they say, does originate with human beings, which gives rise to some limited human freedom. Remember that no one is completely free. It's possible to not be free at all, but no one can have total, absolute freedom. So if we can originate some causes, then that means there has to be some limited form of human free will. Now, the hard determinist is going to respond to this and say, how are any of these causes going to originate with humans if everything that leads up to a particular effect is out of human control? So, as we've talked about already, if everything that leads up to this one decision is out of your control, you don't have any freedom, right? So we're not saying that you can't ever cause anything to happen, only that the ultimate causes behind things are out of your control. And finally, there's the indeterminism view that the book mentions, and this is where we could accept that there's a certain amount of chance and freedom in the world, and that would come from human deliberation and decision making. And that's what you're going to see from Van Inwagen if you do look through the supplementary stuff. He's going to be what we call, well, he's going to argue for the idea that you have free will, at least sometimes, even though we can't really explain how it works. So we'll put together a video for that. You can check that out. All right. So if you have any questions, make sure you email. And thanks for watching.